Welcome to the Intercut podcast channel. I'm your co-host, Zachary Shevich, and joining me, he's like Willy Wonka, it's Arturo Zurita.
I don't even want to be the one with the chocolate, the golden ticket. I'll just watch from a distance. But, Zach, we were talking about one of the shows that was one of your most anticipated, both of our most anticipated.
Yeah.
And now may be one of the best shows to one of us. Another one that may respect it a lot, but may feel very icky.
Yeah, certainly the most controversial comedy to come out in a little while, although I don't know if we anticipated that from the start. The Rehearsal is a new show from Nathan For You creator Nathan Fielder, in which the comedian gives people the chance to rehearse for their own lives in a world where nothing turns out as expected. Art, we've been discussing the show for several weeks on the Weekend Must Watch podcast.
Yep.
But we have been pretty coy about what actually happens so as to not spoil the bizarre experience for other people. But now, for the people who have seen this show, what were the things that stood out to you immediately about Fielder's new show, The Rehearsal?
I think early on when we saw the teaser to it, I think everybody had connected it to kind of be like it's like synecdoche, but it's not necessarily going full Kaufman where it's this narrative and he's being meta in it. He is casting people who are, in a sense, portraying a person who he wants them to be, and sometimes it feels like they're going to fall into being that. It almost felt like, if you've seen Nathan For You, the finale that he had there, which is fantastic, in Finding Frances, it's like a part 2 to that. It's like he realized towards the end of that show, I could do something where I'm not dissecting other people. I'm partly dissecting, or even more so, dissecting myself, and then decided to make the entire show that is The Rehearsal that. To me, this is him going through his own demons, him trying to work out things that he hasn't been able to in his life yet, and really created pawns around him, really created an entire rehearsal space just to be able to vent that out on HBO's budget. I kind of respect that, but I also kind of think it's the craziest thing.
I mean, it is very, very crazy. And I do think, like, obviously it is a show that is, to an extent, about neuroses and about living out all the crazy scenarios that your brain can think of, because I think one of the things that anxiety does to you is it sort of makes you imagine every possible scenario, including the worst ones, including the ones that don't make any sense. And Nathan has chosen to literalize that feeling, that anxiety, by making a show in which they explore all these different possibilities and they dive down every rabbit hole of conversation that could potentially, steer somebody off their path from doing the thing they want to do. I think it's just a pretty brilliant show in the way that it both literalizes people's fears in being honest with others or in experiencing something new, but it shows the ridiculousness of it too, which in a way shows that to get too worked up about something, to get too anxious about it, is to put almost like too much effort into it. And he literalizes that by putting way too much effort into these recreations, down to the rips in the chairs in the alligator lounge, to the balloon in the ceiling. Just the way that they will go to those details, I think, is so impressive that even if you aren't necessarily jiving with the show on like a tonal level or a comedic level, you're gonna be awed by some of the production aspects of it.
Yeah, you're just impressed by it. You're intrigued because, again, the central premise is that he's almost creating the pseudo family where he wants to see what happens if you're able to cast a mom, cast a child, cast an entire family to see what can come out of that. And eventually he becomes the central figure there, where you realize he's not really doing this to put on a show. What originally became this technology, if you want to call it, where he helped a guy who did bar trivia figure out how he can reveal the truth to his friends. He realizes he could use this for something else. It's almost like that barf technology that Iron Man had, where it was just to do some self-therapy. He's doing that over here, but with a TV miniseries budget. It's not even a miniseries anymore. I think we found out that
season 2, it'll be back.
Stock prices went up thanks to the sequel. But yeah, it's just fascinating how he's able to extend that. But that he doesn't know when to stop, right? Like right when you think he's not going to outdo himself again, or he's starting to actually become very dramatic, you might see how this experiment may be going wrong. He doubled downs on it on ways that you didn't think he could from previous episodes, and it's crazy.
So let's chart the progression of the series a little bit, because in episode 1, it's probably the biggest outlier, the orange juice no pulp episode, in that it doesn't feature any of the elements involving the fake family that would come to dominate and kind of define the show. But that first episode featuring Core and his bar trivia confession, I thought was one of the really strong full statements, right? Like it feels like a beginning, middle, and end. It could have been a one-off special. It didn't even need to go beyond that. But I think it's something that highlights the best aspects of the show, in that it's very ridiculous, very absurd, unexpectedly comedic, and then ultimately by the end kind of profound and emotional. Like I felt very touched in those final confession moments, in Nathan trying to explore confessing his own secrets to Core and realizing maybe I'm not ready to do that myself, even though I'm pushing others to do these confessions. I think it's very interesting the ways in which Nathan often uses the subject of these episodes to implicate his own shortcomings.
Easily. That's probably one of the things that I think has really resonated with a lot of people, is that in saying and calling out something from one of the subjects he may have, he then plays it off as if he isn't correcting himself on it. Everyone else must make this change except him, which I think thematically is very interesting. If it wasn't, I guess, people having a problem with it being real people. But I do like how the first one plays out with this idea that no matter how much you rehearse something, it's not going to change the fact that there's going to be variables you can't control. And the way you break down Nathan, and I think the way a lot of people see him, is that he is this dude who feels like everything needs to be that way. Everyone always scours to figure out, is he acting? You know, it's like the first Google question you see when you search up his name. And I know a lot of the side actors in the show for this, because he's hiring a lot of just like extras to play parts, to hype up the real people in it, say that's how he comes off. Mind you, how much time do they spend with Nathan? I don't know, but he dedicates himself to that role. And you're right, the first episode kind of showcases that he is there to tell other people they may need to fix something, even if he may not be fixing that himself.
Right. Episode 2 is where the stakes get raised for the show quite a bit, and it introduces us to Angela, who is, if anything, the second star of the season of The Rehearsal. The person that he decides to help explore her hope for a future as a mother by rehearsing for raising a child in a house that he's designed, where they're putting vegetables into the garden so that they don't have to wait for them to grow, and just really gets into this whole like weird family dynamic that we talked about earlier. It's also the episode where I think we started to get some of this idea of, is he being fair to the subjects? Not specifically Angela, but more so in the other guy who comes along, Mr. crashes his Scion at 100 miles per hour. What was that? I forget that dude's name, but
Robin.
Yeah, I think one of the things that becomes interesting there is this idea of, are you being manipulated into making yourself look bad, or do you just kind of look bad and Nathan's cameras happen to capture it?
All right, look, if I may. You know how there's the Sacha Baron Cohen mentality where he knows what he's going to get out of people, and he's kind of there to exemplify, to kind of shine a light of, look at what this side of America thinks. But he's purposefully going to said conventions, rallies, states, because he may not know how they're going to say something, but he knows the vicinity of what they're going to spew. Yeah. I do feel that Nathan does cast. He seeks out these people who he knows are going to do something, and then acts surprised, like, oh my goodness, obviously you didn't know he's crashing his third Scion, but you knew what you were getting yourself into, and I think that's part of the show that I feel is him not really leaving it up to chance as much as he wants it to come off as.
No, I do think there's this element of any show like this And maybe that's also part of the point too, in that they try to treat it as in like these are just regular people, but you know that's not really the case. And by the way they act, you know that casting has taken their time to find people who they
That's
think
what I'm
will
saying.
do
Yeah.
interesting things. Now, how much of that is just a result of putting up nearly anonymous Craigslist ads and seeing the type of people who respond to that? I don't know, but just as much as it is like a as it is them presenting a version of these people, it's them also selecting the people carefully. And
Yes.
there's definitely not an accident that they ended up with people like Corin, like Angela, who are these very interesting characters, regardless of how Nathan interacts with them.
I mean, I think it gets even bigger than that because you have the character of, I mean, I don't even want to call her a character. We'll get into this idea where people think that
Yeah.
everybody is fake in the show, which is fascinating, but you have the mom.
You're not buying into the conspiracies that they're all actors and it's all scripted.
Look. I think Nathan's crazy enough to do it. I just don't think
Yeah.
that's true. But
Yeah.
we'll get into that later on.
It's almost too bizarre to be scripted at times, I think.
Almost, but he's such a bizarre dude. Look,
Yeah.
she's very religious, and there is this whole element in the show where you almost feel that Nathan's never really put his religion forward, his own, just upbringing, and it clashes really with her character because as they're both playing parents, there's this idea of how are you going to raise a child?
Right.
What's the child's name? Adam. You're dealing with the other guy that accidentally got cast, who sees 33 as a mile marker because that's when Jesus died. He's about to die because he's driving at that speed looking down on his phone.
Right.
I feel like there's too many coincidences that if you're relying on that being by chance, that makes Nathan look no weirder than the people who he cast in the show. But I
Yeah.
don't think he's leaving it up to chance. This is a person who wants everything down to a T, and it's only
Right.
little moments that end up surprising Nathan. He is. We were explaining this on the Weekend Must Watch. I think there's a lot of religious undertones in the series, but where a lot of people think he's playing God, like you said, being able to raise the kid, being able
Yeah.
to change the plantations and everything that he's got there. He ain't God. He's the devil. He is Satan. He is Hasatan in this thing. He is controlling everybody at whim, promising them this glorious, whatever it may be, 5 minutes of fame because they're all actors.
Mm-hmm.
They just think that they're playing a family, but they're ready to clock out at a certain point.
He definitely is a bit of like a mischievous imp. Moving on into like episode 3 is
My favorite.
Is that one your favorite?
I think
mean,
it's my favorite.
It's the first one where we get somebody who maybe can't handle the Fielder method, in that we're introduced to Patrick, who is trying to confess something to his brother, and Nathan sends him on this whole adventure involving hidden gold in order to literalize this idea that he's potentially with a gold digger. And I think it's one of those moments that the show, like, if you can't tolerate the cringe-inducing nature of people being put into the most awkward situations imaginable, getting this guy to wipe some random dude's ass is absolutely going to set you over the edge. But you said this one was your favorite of the episodes.
Yeah, there's something about this one where it is very much like a prank show or a prank movie like Bad Trip, where they pull a prank on somebody that lasts a minute, and you're like, damn, they really had to put that person through that. Whatever the scare is, or dang, the house is on fire. They think the whole blame is on them. Nathan's like, I don't want to call him cruel because I know that word's been used a lot, but he's just like, what if I took that minute and extended it to a day and basis where you're going to come into this Raising Cane's and have to relive what may be you giving up your inheritance because people don't trust the woman who you're with. And the way that he's able to flip that, I think, is where you get the best elements of the show. I don't have a problem with the show being, I don't know how you would phrase it, iffy or sketchy on its morality or its approach, its ethics.
Yeah.
If it's
morally
still able
gray?
to, it's morally gray, but it could still be entertaining. It could still be making a point, even if it's also guilty of that point. And I think this episode exemplifies it the best.
Yeah, I actually absolutely agree with that. Like, I think one of the things that the show does is it's not necessarily claiming innocence from some of the uglier aspects of what reality TV does.
Yeah.
But by highlighting them, it's sort of meant to condemn an industry rather than a
Yes, sir.
specific act, right? And I think to me, that's one of the things that I think is really remarkable about this show, is that it's it's almost like a martyr for the evils of reality TV.
To a degree. I will say one thing that it is guilty of. Vincent, the fake grandpa in this show, he talked about how he's like an undercover person, so he knew that's why they scoped him out. And he's one of the ones who said, Nathan acts just like that. I don't think he's acting. He acts just like he does. But he was kind of lied to. We see this with a lot of docs or, stuff like Nomadland that brings somebody in telling them that it's something or promising them something goes the other way.
Yeah.
He did say, he's like, they did jip me. They had me film a whole bit to promote my book, and it never went. And as soon as the show came out and his episode said, they reminded him about his NDA. They said, don't say anything. That's ... So, again, it is guilty of the same practices that it's critiquing. I don't know if there's a better approach to that, because we talk about a lot of docs where it gets into a very gray area of observing something. But if the documentarian interacts, then it's ruining the purpose of what it's observing. So I guess there's some times where you're just going to be guilty of said thing, but...
We'll circle back to the ethics for sure, but let's talk a little bit about episode 4, the Fielder Method, which is as close as this or any TV show has probably gotten to like literally being Inception or something. The layers upon layers upon layers that you get here as Nathan opens up an acting school, tries to inhabit one of the students taking his class, and then sends that student on crazier and crazier tasks so that he then can dive more into character, to the point where he is living in someone else's house, wearing their clothes and eating their cereal. This was the episode to me that just kind of cemented him as this unbelievable, crazy genius who is going to push to levels that no one else will. The way that it just kept getting deeper and deeper into the task, into the layers, I found to be pretty mind-blowing.
I like the Chicken Tender episode. It's my personal favorite. This is the best one out of the series. It is him perfecting what he's going for. It's like you were saying earlier, if you're not into the comedy and you're not into the themes of it, just the premise of how crazy he can get into this thing is fascinating. And I think that what he does really well here is this is when he starts breaking down that barrier of his own personal life that he's being meta of, and then what he's critiquing in the industry. Because the way that he hires these actors to play like different roles and different things to each other, especially leading on to the finale, he's kind of showcasing how you're setting yourself up to be vulnerable. There's something with the extras that we'll get into later that I think really connects to his Fielder Method here, where people are just bystanders, and he kind of this is the episode where he's really able to showcase that we're still acting even if we're not actors,
and it's interesting because
where the Reddit account did the rehearsal thing too, which was funny. So before they posted on the rehearsal subreddit, they had a practice one leading up to it. But go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, it's interesting because you see these actors who are actual aspiring actors and like think about acting as a craft, trying to sort of pick apart what he's asking of them and compare it to other methods of acting. And they talk about the action being the character, which is sort of one of the ideas in acting, and that you can like through actions inhabit who the character is. And it in a way it reduces people down to being props, and I think that is kind of one of the things that ultimately gets this show in trouble, but also makes it so funny, in that the way that Nathan is able to use people the same way that other shows might use like a lamp, in that they're just like the funniest thing to put in that place for this scene.
It's so over the top as well. But this is, I think, why people started going, wait, what if his Fielder Method actually works? When he's hiring someone to recreate a scenario and he's like, oh, they're not coming off as authentic. What if he nailed it? And the people we think are real in the show are just really good Fielder Method graduates. And we'll never know, Zach.
This episode also features the 15-year-old Adam, played by the actor Joshua, who's one of my favorites in the series. The line, "You're a disaster, my guy," is maybe the line of the show. Although he also is part of one of the absolute darkest turns this show takes, in that they end this episode with this whole like drug sequence and an overdose, and it gets to one of these places where you kind of, I feel like I felt myself sit up and ask, like, is this a joke anymore? Like, where is he going? What buttons is he trying to push? Is it just about making people uncomfortable, or is it really like just wanting to experience something that is your greatest fear?
And that's what I'm saying. I think he's not really being surprised. He is leading himself to find these turning points where he's setting people up for it. And that's why some of the later episodes get a little iffier. But the title to this next one, I had to do a double take on that one after finishing it.
Apocalypto, episode 5. This is the episode in which Nathan finally decides to confront Angela over the way that she's raising their sort of son, their fake son, and Angela's strict Christian beliefs that don't allow any room for Nathan's own Jewish beliefs. It doesn't allow for Nathan to raise the son with Judaism in his life. So Nathan, as he does throughout his shows and seemingly throughout his life, schemes a way to give his son both upbringings. It's a very silly episode. I don't know if you had any greater thoughts on it or on the experiment as a total, because this is also the episode where Angela mostly exits the show.
Yeah, she calls him out and says at the end of the day, it's still going to be what you want it to be. And there's that back and forth where he calls her out for not really being a part of the experiment. And she's like, well, I'm just doing what you asked me to do. With the implication being she's just enjoying being there on vacation, using up HBO's money. Yeah. Which ironically, Zach, is pretty funny when you think of the whole premise of the show.
Kind of what Nathan feels like Nathan's doing too.
I will say that there are moments where, again, how many people can say an anti-Semitic thing? Mind you, we live in America. I guess it's just like that. But you would think that the casting director, from the Raising Cane's to who's going to be a lead, to even a mother later on in the finale, I sometimes wonder if he's keeping a lot of those scenes in, or if he's already, like we were saying, scoping out these people who are problematic, because in them being problematic, it justifies what he's doing to them.
Yeah. I mean, he definitely feels like he is good at pushing buttons. You know, in this episode, there is a moment where he brings in the woman that he's hired to teach his son Jewish lessons to have an argument essentially with Angela. Yeah, and Angela sees through it. Angela knows that Nathan is just trying to set up a scene. And as she's saying it, he's there kind of poking at them, kind of trying to raise the tension a little bit. So he's definitely not innocent in a lot of this drama that ends up being created. All right, so why don't we get to the final episode, Pretend Daddy. This was the only episode that they did not send to critics in advance. So we've been waiting for a few weeks to see how this whole thing would wrap up. And it was, honestly, to me, the most interesting episode of the series. I don't know if I'm going to say best, but it definitely feels like the one that gets to the heart of what Nathan is trying to do here. And I don't know, I found it to be really stunning. Obviously, the big takeaway is the whole situation with Remy, the 6-year-old who is one of the child actors involved in this big experiment, who bonds with Nathan to the point of saying that he loves his pretend daddy and cries a lot at being told that his time in the experiment is over. And I think the thing that I'm ultimately struck by, aside from just being like obviously viscerally sad to see this child in pain and unhappy that he's no longer get to experience this thing that brought him so much joy, is that I think this is a thing that happens a lot, and it's not something that we're often privy to. There are many child actors who are working in Hollywood and who get hired onto all sorts of productions, and when those productions end, there isn't a documentary crew also filming behind the scenes and then repackaging that into an episode. So as upsetting as it is to see, I think there's a bravery in then also including it in your show, not just shuffling it off to the sides, not lying about the collateral damage caused by his adventure, and trying to actually navigate what to do about a really difficult situation.
I'd say the best part of this episode is the remnants of the Fielder Method episode. I think it's like a really good part 2 to that, because this is the one where he brings in the extras and then realizes extras can't speak. And it's like he's commenting on, like, did y'all know this is a thing?
Absolutely hilarious. Saved $15,000 on that birthday party.
$15,000 for sure. But what else do people do to save $15,000 that make it not as authentic? Does it matter? Especially when you're talking about birthday parties. He did this really fine line that I appreciated and I respect in the finale of kind of paralleling parenting to running a set. How cheap can you go? What are the ins and outs to it? As you were describing, being able to have this child who can't differentiate, especially with that kid's background of not having a dad, that this isn't their father. But do kids know that? What are the types of parents that are putting their children in acting classes? Are they there to take care of them emotionally? You would agree he is very well aware, though, Nathan, what was going to happen to the child.
I mean, I don't know about very well aware. I think he seems pretty shocked by it, honestly, that and more disturbed by it than the parent often, because I think the parent has a better sense of her child.
Back for content. He doesn't go back to fix a child.
I'm happy to say that it's both. If you don't want to agree with me, fine. But I would say it's both, because there are moments there where he does look quite concerned. There's a moment where after Remy has stopped calling him daddy, where he brings it back up again, and you see Nathan's demeanor change. I don't know. I don't think he's not bothered by this.
He blames the mom.
I wouldn't say
says, "Are you sure?"
I think he's genuinely asking because he's not a parent. I mean, this whole thing, his whole involvement in it started because of his own anxiety over being a parent. And if we want to get back to that whole second half, that I found to be just sublime in its weird mix of unsettling moments and surreality and awkward comedy, I think what that whole speech at the end is meant to do for you is show that Nathan, through this process, does feel like he's gained some of the tools where he can be a parent. Where as he's inhabiting Amber and he's supposed to be playing fake Remy's mom, he says, "No, I'm your daddy. I am a dad. I can do this, and I've navigated a tough challenge with Remy, and we've gotten through it. He's gotten through the difficulty of that moment. Nathan, too, can handle being a parent, even though I'm not." And ultimately, I think there is a lot of like genuine concern there, even though it's then repackaged into content.
As producer of the show, I think he has interest in said storyline for sure.
Yeah.
But I wonder if, from the line that the mom gives him of, "Trust me, I know, I saw it in his face," it's something you know when he's a parent. You only know that when you're a parent looking at your kid's eyes. I think it's still something he hasn't experienced. So I wonder, him having a kid, how different that would have him look back at what he does in the show.
Yeah.
I will leave it at that.
It is funny because it has been like a continued fascination of his, the idea of showbiz parents and what they're willing to put their kids through.
Yeah.
The Claw episode, one of the most infamous episodes of Nathan For You, he talks openly about these parents let their children do this for $100. Let them children potentially be exposed to him for $100. So I don't know. I think part of his fascination is with the idea of like allowing a child to do it, but there's also just, I think part of what it is highlighting an aspect of the industry that doesn't get focused on.
For sure.
The behind the scenes dealing with talent and what happens after the show ends in a way that we don't normally get insight to. So I found all that stuff really fascinating and really insightful. And I think a lot of the things that people are critiquing about that last episode are things that the show is actually focused on and is trying to critique as well. So I don't know if we've talked a little bit about how he is sort of crossing some ethical lines, but I think it's almost done in the pursuit of showing how easy they are to cross. And like, I've been in some discussions with other people about their feelings on this, and it's like maybe child labor laws need to change. And if that's what Nathan is bringing to attention, then that's really cool in a way too.
Yeah, and I think what he's commenting on is genius. His approach to it, I can't think of another way to approach it.
Yeah.
I think he's guilty of it. There's no other way to go about it, though. I just don't like the idea that we're assuming he's as innocent. We want to say he's a genius and he knows what he's going to get the kid to do, but then it happened by accident. What else was episode 6 going to be then? It's all
I think
being written on the fly.
I think some of it's found material. You know what I mean? Like you follow the story where it takes you.
To a degree, for sure.
Yeah. I don't know. I just think it's almost impossible to predict that kind of reaction out of a kid. But ultimately, kids are resilient, and stuff like this happens. And I don't really.
When you cast a child, you know both of their parents. I know that much as well. So that is in the resume.
Yeah, but are they going to restrict it to only children from 2-parent homes? That's bizarre in its own way.
Zach, you're saying that's bizarre as if the Fielder method doesn't get into what the Fielder method episode gets into.
I don't know. I just don't know if like ultimately that is a responsibility that lays on the feet of the show or more of the industry as a whole,
I think it's saying that other shows are responsible for it and thus it would be responsible as well.
Yeah. Well, regardless, it made for fascinating TV.
It was enjoyable to watch.
I really enjoyed it. I've rewatched that final episode like 3 times already because like it's rare for me to get a feeling where it's not just like one feeling, right? It's a wave of different emotions. You feel the empathy for Remy. You feel the discomfort at the bizarre nature of these recreations. You feel how funny it is that their performances are tuned to this degree. But like, just sitting in that mix and not really knowing what one way to feel is one of the most wonderful ways I feel like you can react to art. That's one of the most wonderful things that art can do to you. So that it gave me that feeling. I'm just very thankful to this show. It's easily one of the best shows of the year to me. And I don't know, man, I'm always going to be there day one for a Nathan project. And The Rehearsal only made me double down on that belief.
So you'd say as a whole you like it better than Nathan For You? Mind you, multiple seasons on Nathan, but...
Yeah. I mean, Nathan For You, I think, is a better comedy show, and this I like more as like an existential exploration. But like that's my mode anyway. I like something that's going to make me think and make me question stuff. So this is certainly a deeper, more complex show than Nathan For You, even though Nathan For You is brilliant in its own way too.
I would highly recommend if you're on HBO and you haven't caught it for whatever reason. I feel like if you've caught this, you've definitely hopped on to How To with John Wilson. He is also producer on that bad boy, and that's another example of approaching the exact same stuff here, but like really having that one-on-one interaction with people and then being able to highlight nuances or things about people you may cross on a daily basis that you may not know about. So it's a fascinating world, even when it dives into elements that people may not agree with, even parts that I feel are a little bit sketchy. It's still fascinating to see how he's able to build this world and get authentic reactions. Because again, that's what the Fielder method's about. He doesn't want to see you acting. He wants to make sure that you've got it. And at the end, it's just realizing no matter how hard you try, there is no rehearsal for life.
Yep. And I love that there's like that profound slice to it too. It's such an interesting show. I'm also, especially after watching this, like that much more excited for the show that he has in the works with Emma Stone and the Safdie brothers. I think it's going to be for Showtime, and they play a couple who has an HGTV show that starts to go wrong. After
Okay.
seeing this, like knowing that that's coming up next, they're going to absolutely crush it. I'm really, really excited for that too. So I'd say a strong recommendation for me on The Rehearsal, and I think you'd recommend it too.
I
Maybe
do.
not
I do
as
recommend
highly
it.
as I do.
No. I recommend it. I like what he's going for. I could just also understand the iffiness of
Yeah.
what happens in there. But at the same time, I'm telling you, people were saying that there's an ARG game to this where you follow every book or thing that's mentioned in the show and that it leads you into somehow seeing different connections. But people are like, there's no way he built these accounts back in 2013. There's just
Right.
no way,
But
Zach, right?
That's the thing, that
Right?
he is so good at this that it gets people into that conspiratorial type of thinking.
It's
I mean, like,
successful.
it's the man behind dumb Starbucks. He could be behind anything. Who knows?
He hacked the Emmys, reportedly, allegedly, supposedly.
Allegedly, supposedly. All right, so check out The Rehearsal. Let us know what you think, whether or not it is an ethically compromised show, or if you just
You don't
were able
care.
to enjoy it. Maybe it's going to be too much for you. I feel like that's totally a possibility too. But that's all for this installment of After Credits. You can catch more from me, Zach Shevich, by following me on Twitter, Instagram, or Letterboxd at ZShevich. That's ZSHEV as in Venti, ICH. And check out my YouTube or TikTok channels at Multiplex Show Artwork. Where can people find more from you?
You can find me over at LME Explain or LME Streams, where I will be doing my LMEs first to make sure that they're well, and then I will put it on the LME, my Twitter and my rehearsal Twitter, my letterbox, and then every week here on the Intercut podcast where we just go raw.
You can listen to every episode of the Intercut podcast on iTunes, Anchor, Spotify, whatever your favorite podcatcher is. I happen to like Overcast, and then make sure you subscribe not just to the audio podcast, but to the video feed as well on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/IntercutPod, where you can catch our bright, smiling faces as we break down the latest in entertainment. Find new episodes of the Intercut Weekend Must-Watch streaming on our YouTube channel every Monday. And please leave us a comment, like the videos, and consider heading over to iTunes to give us that much-requested 5-star review. Shout out to our listeners in Ghana. Like our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter pages. Support our Patreon. All of them are at IntercutPod to get updates throughout the week from me, from Art, from all the guests that we feature here on Intercut. Thanks again for tuning in, and until next time, we all make mistakes, Baba.